welcome to another episode of About the Authors TV UK edition. I'm your host, Jake Brown. Time magazine recently celebrated one of Britain's most celebrated authors, Alex Wheatle, whose story is unique to most of his contemporaries in literature, sounding like something right out of a book, starting with the fact that he's today an accomplished and award-winning author, having written more than a dozen books, including children's and young adult novels, as well as writing and performing a play about his life titled Uprising. His award-winning 1999 debut novel, Brixton Rock, was adapted for the stage and as a short film, and in 2008 he received an MBE in the Queen's Birthday Honors List for service to literature. At the same time, Wheatle was living during a period of tense race relations in Britain. These experiences have informed his writing, particularly in his early novels like East of Acre Lane, which the Times celebrated as one where his blend of frantic action and thoughtful writing ranks Alex Wheatle alongside Corita Newland as one of the most exciting writers of the Black urban experience. He'd cement his reputation as one of the United Kingdom's most cutting-edge new novelists in the early 2000s, with a series of hits like The Seven Sisters, Checkers, co-written with Mark Parham, before returning to the solo realm with Island Songs, which the Daily Mail hailed as plain, unsparing, and heart-renderingly poignant, before achieving international fame with The Dirty South. With The Guardian impressed as many were book in and out, and especially in this story, by the fact that Wheatle is a sharp-eyed observer of the behavior and language that make up his fictional world. He fills every page with hard-boiled authenticity. Clever links with previous works mean former characters are either referred to or turn up in unexpected cameos, making The Dirty South a welcome treat for fans of his oeuvre. The Independent UK was equally impressed with Brenton Brown, noting importantly that from time to time, a new book arrives which catches its moment in almost an uncanny grip. A rich layering of motive and emotion, robust dialogue, streetwise humor, and muscular, mischievous vernacular. And the praise continued for Lickle Brit and the multi-award-winning Crongton Knights, which took home the Guardian's Children's Fiction Prize and the Accelerated Reader's Quiz Writer's Choice Award. Straight Outta Crongton, Uprising, Homeboys, Homegirl, where Bookseller UK reported that Wheatle returns to the world of his award-winning Crongton books with among his most powerful and personal novels yet. While Observer magazine was moved by Wheatle's empathy, authentic characters, and rich dialogue that illuminate the dark. Staying just as relevant in the 2020s, Cane Warriors took home the 2021 Young Quills Award for Best Historical Fiction, and the School Library Journal applauded the author's success in bringing the struggle of slavery in the Jamaican sugarcane fields to life. A refreshing and heartbreaking story that depicts both a real-life uprising against oppression and the innate desire to be free, while it continued to dazzle with new thought-provoking and eye-opening titles like Kringle, Commotion of the Caribbean, hailed as a stunning historical adventure that upends stereotypes by the Times UK, while in a reflection of his international reading audience, was praised by Jamaica's The Gleaner as a powerful narrative of trauma and triumph that the reviewers simply could not put down, while Ghana's KTR News found the novel to be tension-filled and heart-stopping, a work of edgy brilliance that brims with existential fervor. Along with more recent works like Welton Blake, Curb Cane Boys, Witness, and Sufra, the memoir of a Brixton reggae head, where the Library Journal concluded that readers will be drawn to Wheatle's exquisite prose, and lovers of music will appreciate how reggae brings light during difficult times. With a personal saga so compelling, the Time magazine, in concluding their cover story in recent times, shared the news that these experiences are dramatized in the eponymous Alex Wheatle, the fourth installment of Steve McQueen's Small Axe series, airing one time per week on Amazon Prime, with Oscar-winning director McQueen himself personally endorsing the author as a singular voice who writes from a place of honesty and passion, with the full knowledge and understanding that change can only happen through words and actions. And he's here today from the UK to talk about making his unique mark on literature over the past quarter century. Alex, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here. Time magazine, in their extended coverage of your career, traveled back in time to your very humble roots. Born to Jamaican parents in 1963 in Brixton, South London, Wheatle spent much of his childhood in a children's home in nearby Croydon, before moving back to Brixton to live in a young person's hostel in the late 1970s. Is it safe to assume that reading provided an escape of sorts for you, given that frightening for any child environment that you were growing up in?
Yes, it was a definite companion for me because it was my refuge, if you like. You know, I grew up in a very violent and abusive children's home, and so at night time, I would lose myself in comics. I remember going downstairs to the bike shed, taking a front light from there and taking it upstairs with me. And I used to read comics under the bed covers, and it was a total escape from my daily existence. I've always loved storytelling. I guess the first narrative I've ever read, a full one, was Treasure Island. I read that from about 8, 9 years old. And so there wasn't many books around where I grew up, but if there was anything lying around or some discarded Christmas present, whether it was Huckleberry Finn or Tom Sawyer, I would pick it up and I'd read them too. Apart from all the football magazines and the old comics, I'm not sure if American audiences are familiar with these, but I was into comics like the Beano, Wizard and Chips, the Dandy, and so forth. So that really got me to love stories.
The BBC would write in a cover story that it was here in Brixton that you would finally find a sense of community for the first time. Finally find a sense of community for the first time. Importantly, because it was among the West Indian community that you found a passion for music and DJing. Please talk about discovering reggae and how it helped you find your way to your first creative identity as Yardman Iyer, a DJ performing prominently around this part of London. Around this part of London is a founding member of the crucial rocker sound system.
Yeah, I guess initially I was searching for my identity because I did feel lost, especially when I moved to Brixton. I mean, I grew up in an area that was almost totally white. There was only one or two black classmates, and one of them used to bring in a little boombox, and he used to come with the cassette tapes. I don't know if you remember those TDK cassette tapes. You don't look old enough, but and it was the first time I heard reggae. You know, not just the reggae you hear on the radio, but proper reggae produced in Jamaica and so on. And it blew me away, and also it gave me something to engage with, something to relate to. I felt for the first time that, oh, this is me. You know, they're addressing my concerns, my life experiences, and so on. Because obviously, a lot of reggae is very visual about what growing up in Trenchtown, for example, is like, and so forth. And so that's what first attracted me to reggae, and I became a nerd about it. You know, so from that point onwards, from 13, 14, I would collect reggae. I would take a bus into Croydon, and they had one reggae record shop there, and I spent my paper round money there, and I built up my collection. And so that was my rock, if you like. That was my. It kind of acted in the same way as comics did when I was 6, 7, 8 years old. It gave me that kind of balm, if you like, to try and understand my life, try and understand my place in the world, and it spoke to me like no other music could. When I moved to Brixton, it seemed like everybody was part of a sound system crew, and I used to enjoy reading and writing. So I guess it was a natural progression for me. And also, I was coming to the time in my life, 14, 15, 16, where I wanted to express what I had experienced in my life up to that point. You know, living in a children's home, living in a hostel in Brixton, where the social service didn't really, you know, didn't really give a damn, really, to be honest. And so I just wanted to part with that experience. And I felt that my story and others like me was not out there. You know, the Brenton Browns of this world, if you like. I wanted to present them, and I felt that a Brenton Brown deserved their place in fiction as much as anybody else. So that was my chief motivation. At first, when we got ourselves two Goodman's bass speakers, 18 inches, and a couple of tweeter boxes, and we got ourselves a little transformer amp. It wasn't that big, wasn't that powerful, and so we managed to play at house parties, friends of ours, in the South London area. And then when we gradually made a bit of money, we invested it back into the sound system, and we built more speakers, so we was able to play in halls and big dances and so forth. So it was an exciting time of my life. You know, we used to look forward to the weekend because you know, you'd wonder what crowd you get. Sometimes you might be unfortunate enough to have an empty dance. Sometimes it was a ram jam affair. So it's something that I loved, you know. So and I played sound system for a number of years, thoroughly enjoyed it. And it was me, it was my self-expression of who I was, you know, my place in the world, you know. So I think it's very important for anybody to do that, just express themselves.
Where did you get your DJ name, Yardman Iyer?
It was given to me by my best friend at the time, Valentine Golden. He had a backyard, he had a small shed, wasn't that big. And that is where we built all the speaker boxes. And in West Indian terminology, they call a back garden a yard. And so because I was always out there, whether it was tinkering with speaker boxes, building speaker boxes, and so forth, um, Valentine christened me Yardman Irie. So that's where that came from.
You'd go on to write quite powerfully about what Time reported as your participation in the 1981 Brixton Uprising, where you subsequently served 4 months in a prison for your involvement, where you shared a cell with a Rastafarian man named Simeon, who became a mentor. Noting that as a way to process how you felt after leaving prison, you began writing poetry and then narrative fiction drawing from these experiences. And this is captured and channeled powerfully in the pages of your first three novels, especially beginning when we meet Brene Brown in Brixton Rock, then in East of Acre Lane, where the Times UK flipped out over your rhythmic, fast-talking tour of the Tower blocks of South London. The strength of the novel lies in the characters who form Biscuit's posse, writing in a street slang that reads like an urgent urban poetry. Wheatle catches the dialogue of the friends and contrasts it with passages of distilled description. He observes meticulously the subcultures within the community, and the Seven Sisters, later republished as Homeboys. Please talk about recreating that childhood experience into such a profound reading one.
Still feel that up to this day, there hasn't been much narrative written by people like me who actually were active in the Brixton Uprising, we like to call it. I mean, there was the great poet, Brixton poet Linton Kwesi Johnson, who used to express himself in dub poetry. But apart from that, there is very little written. I mean, obviously, you have your newspaper columnists and commentators and so forth, but they never actually experienced it. And so I just felt it was very important that we get to own that narrative. We were the ones who knew what it was like. We lived that. We lived through that police oppression. Arrested by the police, beaten up in police cells, and the rest of it. So it's very important that we leave some kind of legacy there. And I still don't think there is enough. But I felt that I've done my little part. So hopefully it will be remembered. And I get calls from media people asking me to comment on what happened back then. And I think that's important because young people need to know the history from our perspective, if you like, of that time and era.
Please tell us about your cellmate, a Rastafarian named Simeon, who introduced you to a whole new era of authors, including C.L.R. James, John Steinbeck, that would directly influence the writing of Brixton Rock, East of Acre Lane, and Seven Sisters. More recently republished as Homeboys for a new generation of readers.
Yes, he was an avid reader. And the first book he gave me was The Black Jacobins by the great Trinidad writer, C.L.R. James. And then I basically devoured his bookshelf in the small prison cell where we resided. And I was introduced to, as you suggest, we should write Native Son. I remember that. He introduced to me James Baldwin, all these great Harlem Renaissance writers. And so that just sparked my imagination. So for the first time in my life, I was reading about the Black experience, not just from the UK, but in the US. And I felt there was a collective experience there, that mirrored my own. And so that excited me that there were Black writers, women and male, who were, writing about their experiences and being inspired by their experiences. And that gave me a momentum and encouragement to finally sit down and write about my experience, stories based on my experience. So that was crucial for my development as a writer. I started it 5, 6 years before it was published, but not just Bricks and Rock. It was just, I used to keep a journal. I don't know, I know writers develop in different ways, but I kept a journal, sometimes diary, and I'll put in it experiences that I had, experiences that my friends had. Just as I said, I wanted to express my life and my friends' lives in some kind of art form. So, and that took me to poetry, that took me to lyrics, that took me to short stories, that took me to the journal. And so, really, my first three novels, Bricks and Rock, East of Baker Lane, and Seven Sisters, although that was renamed Homeboys, is the result of that work that I did when I was 20, 21, 22. Eventually they turned into novels. I had enough material there to say, oh, look, I've got three or four narratives here. Maybe I could, try and sift them out and turn them into novels.
The Independent raved that these works were vibrant, pulsing with the reggae beats of the era. The dialogue has rhythm and inventiveness, and the violent climax is a cathartic one, the logical and positive first stage of a revolution. And it was through a very colorful cast of characters that you told this story, beginning with Brenton Brown, his mother Cynthia, his beautiful half sister Juliet, Terry Flynn, Biscuits, Coffinhead, Nunchucks, Denise, Royston, Carlo or John Nelson. Any favorites to hang out with on the block or page, so to speak?
I was very fortunate that I lived in a place like Brixton where there were such colorful characters all around you. And so I didn't really have to do much for character development or side characters. They were there in front of me. I was friends with them, lived with them, did all kinds of things with them. I've met the John Elsons, I've met the Brenton. Well, Brenton Brown is a bit of me too. I had that rage when I was 16, 17, 18, if you like. So I didn't have to go far, if you like, to create these characters. They were already placed right front and center before me. I guess Brenton Brown will always be my favorite character because I guess I base him a lot on myself. So yeah, and your coffin heads, your biscuits. I mean, Biscuit, he was based on a very good friend of mine. So I guess if you're a fiction writer, even though we're writing fiction, we cannot help but use our or employ our life stories, our journeys, our friendship pool, and so forth.
After blending the inspiration of your own experiences and those you've cited as influences following the Brixton Uprising successfully into your first published book, that must have been quite a liberating feeling to hold it victoriously in hand as a finished piece of art.
Jake, it was all those things. It was a surreal moment, strange, just, oh my God, it's here. It's here. Someone like me with my background who wasn't going to school from the age of 15 could produce this thing called a book. It was an amazing moment. So I believe that everyone, Simeon, who I based John Elson on, he used to tell me constantly that everyone is blessed in some kind of way. Everyone is talented. And that individual just has to go out there and try and locate their talent. And I didn't really understand what he used to say back then. I was this angry 18-year-old kid. But now I believe it. We're all talented in some way. We're blessed with something when we were born. And my superpower was reading and writing. And so I firmly believe that. So I'm very proud of what I have achieved. Just finishing the first novel was a fantastic achievement for me. And even everything else is a bonus. All the plays, the work with Steve McQueen and so on. I never imagined that in a million years. But because I believe what Simeon used to tell me and drum into me every day, it's come to fruition. Well, I started to believe in myself. So when I finally sat down with all these papers, this journal and lyrics and so on to write Bricks and Rock, it was that belief that I needed because so many others who I know, they struggled with that. They struggled with self-belief. Oh, I can't do this. I can't do that. That is for people to go university or well-educated and so on. But I had that belief. I had that belief from meeting Simeon, and he really encouraged me. And everybody needs that. Everyone needs someone to encourage them, no matter what your background.
Your imagination next took you on a departure from this urban storyscape to a new setting in the sky for a hijacking careful Eddie Maynard's trying to pull off. Was this crime caper in the air inspired out of a deliberate desire to head somewhere new creatively?
Yeah, that was a fun book to write. I just wanted to have some fun, have a laugh, and I wrote it with excuse me, I wrote that with a very good friend of mine who I've known for a number of years. In fact, we met at a writers group where we used to meet in a bar, and we used to share what we had written during that week. we used to get half drunk and try to comment and try to give an honest critique that never really happened because we had too much drink probably. And one day we probably had too much to drink and we decided let's write something together. So that is how Checkers came about. So yeah, it was fun to do. And sometimes you need that because sometimes I've been accused that my material is too bleak, too ghetto, too this, too that. So it's nice sometimes when I write the odd fun book, like The Humiliation of Welton Blake that I wrote for children. I had such a great time writing that. It just gave me a release after writing Cane Warriors.
You'd return from there to your own roots with an Island Songs, which the Daily Mail praised as plain, unsparing, and heart-rendingly poignant. What first drove you to tell the story of two sisters, and Jenny and Hortense Rodney, who grew up in Jamaica and then over the course of the story wind up emigrating to Brixton by its end? And what was the personal discovery like for you during its writing?
The tracing of my own family. I was reunited with my mother um, in 1998, and I was reunited with my father in 1987. And at that point in my life, I was visiting Jamaica quite often. And me being a storyteller, you probably know this, Jake, that you're hungry for stories, aren't you? And so obviously I didn't grow up with my parents. So I used to badger them about what it was like living in Jamaica. My mother grew up in a small town called Richmond in St. Mary, which is about 8 miles inland from Port Maria. My father lived in a town called Old Harbour, which is about 10 miles past Spanish Town. So I was just hungry to learn about their experiences as young people and teenagers and what motivated them to come to Jamaica and the stories my father used to tell me about coming over on a ship. And sometimes, well, he did find two starways. So much of it was written from their experiences. So I'm really proud of that book, really proud, because I couldn't just rely on my own experiences or my friends' experiences. I had to do some proper research and interview my mother, my father, and record it, and then sit down like a student and basically write my thesis. There was a healing going on, process going on. I mean, I was especially angry with my father, and I do refer to that in my biography because I discovered through my files that he was the one who placed me into care. So when I when we were first reunited, there was a lot of tension there. He wasn't quite sure how I would react, and I wasn't quite sure how I would react. But after one blazing row, we got up in the morning and he said, Alex, would you like to go on a day trip? I said, yeah, yeah, of course. And so I wanted to go to Bob Marley's birthplace in 9 Mile in St. Anne, but he's not a reggae fan. So to compromise, he decided to take me to St. Mary, actually, Noel Coward's old property, Firefly. And on that trip, we bonded. We understood each other a lot more, and I learned to understand that adults they make mistakes too that they regret, and all because they're adults, it doesn't make them perfect beings. And when I was growing up, I did not quite accept that or understand that, or I couldn't fathom why my father would just leave me. But they make mistakes, so we kind of built bridges on that trip, and he passed away in 2011. And in the end, I guess I felt quite fortunate that I got to know him because many of the friends that I grew up with never got to know their parents.
And it must have brought them a great sense of pride to see you turn life into such powerful art on the page.
Oh, yes. Yes. My family in the US are very proud. My mother's still alive. She lives in Washington, D.C. with my sister. I've got four sisters living in the States, two in Miami, two in D.C. I have a brother who lives just outside DC in Alexandria, Virginia, and I try to see them every year. Obviously, the pandemic put a stop to that, but hopefully, I'll be going out there again this November for Thanksgiving. I usually go Thanksgiving, and now where it's like we were never apart. It's a fantastic feeling that to know that is my blood, basically, and unconditional love. I never had that as a child, so it's nice to have it no matter what age you are.
The Guardian would observe at the outset of their riveted review of The Dirty South that novels set in the world of urban fiction are extremely thin on the ground these days. So it's refreshing then to read a work that details the day to day life of the Dirty South, better known as Brixton. What follows is a first hand look at an urban teenager's slow descent into inner city madness, surrounded by negative examples, unwilling to heed his parents' warnings to stay on the righteous path, haunted by a belief that his father might once have lived a similar life. Huggins bounds from one bad situation to another, fighting rival crews from nearby neighborhoods, watching the police gather when their local supplier is killed, looking for love in all the wrong estates, even as he buries his fear beneath an armor of streetwise cool. Noting importantly that as it had been for you, even amid that gritty backdrop with all of its inherent challenges, the author appears keen to detail the urban blight that could affect anyone from any city, before importantly concluding that the power of love is evident in every grimy chapter, whether at home or on the streets. Many of the novel's relationships are strong and true. Why did you feel the 20-year mark after the original uprising was the right point to begin telling Dennis's story at?
Based on real life, really, because at that point I was asked, requested to go into prisons, talk to young people, and do workshops with them about writing lyrics and so on, or writing letters back home to their families. And through that, I got to understand their journeys, the wrong decisions they made, and so that more or less inspired the Dirty South. Because sometimes it's a fine line, isn't it? Whether you go this way or that way, and so that's what really got me going with the Dirty South. That even though you could be living in a decent family home, not much too problems, it doesn't mean that you might not make wrong decisions. You know, so obviously there's more chance you might make wrong decisions if you grow up in a home where there's not much love there or affection or money. Let's face it. And so that was one of my what I like to think is a social commentary book, quite an angry book. So I'm proud of that. I'm proud of that very much. I think.
You and readers then had a reunion with Brenton Brown many years after we'd first met him. And following in the thematic spirit of your previous title, time here has passed too, and Brenton has now grown. How much did you want his character to evolve from the rightfully angry young man we met in Brixton Brock? And where did you trace any of that growth through your own evolution personally, to the degree you'd be willing to open up about it a bit?
Brenton Brown was always living in the back of my head. What's he doing now? How does he resolve the family situation with his mother and his half sister? I left a lot of open questions at the end of Brixton Rock. So, and many fans of the book would ask me, Alex, what's going to happen? And so I dwelled on this for a number of years, and I decided to tackle it one day. So, and that's what I did do. And again, there's part of me in there where he's a changed man. Really, he's not so full of rage as he once was. He's trying to eke out a life as a builder, carpenter. But obviously he's very emotional. He because it's one thing that struck with me, and it's the same with me too. That if you haven't felt love, parental love, or even a brotherly love or sisterly love, once you find any kind of love, it's very hard to let go. Very difficult to let go of that. And so that was the picture I wanted to portray. That for someone like Brenton, a care leaver, it's so difficult to try and let go of your original love when you've never had it or experienced it before.
The Huffington Post would compliment Licklebrick as a triumph in observational writing, accurately capturing the rhythms and the flavors of Black British life. The dialogue is witty, fast, and very funny, adding to the tragedy of the action that sees Lamar drawn from being a good boy to one who gets in deep with gang life. What was the balance for you in writing your first YA novel here, between the circumstances facing Venetia, McKay, Jonah, and Licklebrick, in a book ultimately named among the best YA books of the year by The Telegraph, who like so many enjoyed the strong and edgy humor?
I had to really tune this new art because there are different disciplines. plot becomes very important because you cannot just be meandering away, smelling the roses and so on. You've got to have a decent amount of action, of always you got to carry some kind of momentum in your narrative. And so I had to learn that. I mean, island songs, you could just kind of um, sleep into it if you like, and enjoy it on a hammock somewhere in Jamaica, with a nice rum cocktail beside you. But when you're writing for children, they want immediacy. They want the story to happen now. And so I had to learn that. I had 3, 4 attempts. And I guess because I was, when I was a teenager, it was so eventful for me, a, a conflict of emotions. It really was for me. And I had to struggle with my identity and so many other things. It was such a momentous period in my life. I guess that's the same for everybody. But for me, growing up without parents, it was so traumatic. And so what I did, I employed those emotions, not just of me, but friends of mine. And I felt there was a lot of story to tell about that particular period of one's life. I really did. And sometimes I still think that sometimes adults dismiss the trauma, the emotions that we all go through when we're teenagers.
You really struck a chord with readers' necks when you took us on a tour of Crongton throughout a duology that won the Guardian's Children's Fiction Prize and the Accelerated Reader Writer's Choice Award. Going back long before the British Theatre was raving about the acclaimed tour of their stage adaptations of Brixton Rock, Pilot Theatre will stage the world premiere, M.T. Hussein's new adaptation of Alex Wheatle's award-winning Crongton Nights. Life isn't easy on the Crongton estate, and for McKay and his mates, it's all about keeping their heads down. But when a friend finds herself in trouble, they set out on a mission that goes further than any of them imagined. Crongton Nights will take you on a night of madcap adventure as McKay and his friends, the Magnificent Six, encounter the dangers and triumphs of a mission gone awry. In this world premiere adaptation of Wheatle's award-winning novel, the pulse of the city is alive on stage, with a soundscape of beatboxing and vocals laid by a cast and created by acclaimed musician Conrad Murray. Please take viewers back in time before these characters wound up being played by actors on stage, through McKay and Moe's journey throughout Crongton Nights and Straight Outta Crongton, respectively.
I just remember, Jake, when my kids were young, when they started having birthday parties, and they would invite their friends to the house, and their friends were very diverse. And it wasn't really an issue with them where they came from, who their parents were, or what country their parents came from. So I wanted to kind of present um, a place like Crongton, where who your parents were, where your parents came from didn't really matter, but they were deep friends anyway. That was my first motivation in writing a Crongton series. I wanted a collection of friends who got on, and where their particular families came from didn't really matter. That wasn't important to the plot. What was important was the emotions of the character and what their home lives were like, and whether they're dealing with parents who didn't get on, whether they're dealing with poverty, whether they're dealing with a brother who's gone off the tracks, or whatever it may be. I just wanted to keep it plot centric, if you like, but fill in the book or the cast with these characters from wherever. McKay, his grandmother is Scottish. I wanted to make him as diverse as possible, and this is what happens. That occurs now in families all over the world. We're becoming much more diverse, aren't we? Especially in places like London, New York City, and so on. I mean, even my family is very diverse. So I wanted to have McKay, and I've known children, friends of mine, who have lost a loved one at an early age. And the grieving process doesn't necessarily just last until the funeral. Sometimes it could last for much longer than that, to try and get over that experience. And so I remembered that particularly when I was creating McKay. And that was very important for me because children go through these experiences. And sometimes, as I mentioned earlier, adults sometimes dismiss their emotions. For For the female characters, I have to admit that I relied on my daughter a great deal. So I used to say to her, I used to ask all kinds of questions. What would you feel this particular thing happened, or what happened to your friends, and so on? And she would answer me honestly. And she was a great help in creating not just Smo, but Elaine and so on. So that was a great help. And also for my time in a children's home, that informed me just as much. Where again, I was very fortunate. The household that I was living in was white, mixed race, black, and sometimes from very close up, I would witness what they were going through. I heard the tears at night. I heard the frustrations. I heard all these things and witnessed all these things. And so I felt it was very important that I represent that on a page, because sometimes I think with especially male writers, when we're writing about inner city communities, we forget about the females. We tend to leave them out of the narrative. So it's very important that I include them.
Please paint a picture of how you approach bringing urban neighborhoods like Crongton to life on the page as vibrantly, vividly, and realistically as you do.
Yes, that is very important as well. So, in fact, when I write more about Crongton, I want to build on that. I have a dream one day of writing a crime book for adults set in Crongton, where I will expand that landscape, if you like, because I love going back there. I love. I guess the good thing about Crongton is that I don't have to. I'm not restricted by real places like Brixton or whatever. I can do what I like with it. And as a fictional writer, that is a joy. It really is. So that means that I can really explore. I can, if I want a certain shop called, uh, I don't know, Trainers Are Us or whatever, or Sneakers Are Us, I can put that there. If I want a club in such and such a street, I can put that there. It's up to my own imagination. And I love the freedom of doing that.
Now, you really stuck to the golden rule of never forgetting where you came from, even after you were successful, and Uprising is a powerful demonstration of that. What brought and keeps bringing you back to revisiting a place who survived that same reality might understandably never want to return to, even in literature?
That book was commissioned, actually. I've mentioned before that I was asked to and requested to go into prisons and facilitate workshops, creative writing, and so forth. And so I was asked by this prison group, would I mind if I wrote something about my own life and so they could take that book into prisons and share it, and hopefully that would inspire inmates. So that is how that came about. And again, I felt it was important, because if my life can inspire others who were in the same situation as I was, even if I can inspire one person, to try and make good of their talent, then I've succeeded.
Bookseller Magazine felt you next returned to the world of your award winning Crongton books with your most powerful and personal novel yet. Naomi Brissett is a teenage girl growing up too fast in the UK care system. Her journey through the series of foster homes exposes the unsettling, often heart wrenching truth of this life. Yet, despite her grit, Wheatle's writing is as rich and warm as ever, bringing courage and hope to an unforgettable heroine's story. Why did it make sense in Home Girl to tell this story this time around from Naomi's teenage perspective, where Observer Magazine found your empathy, authentic characters, and rich dialogue illuminate the dark?
I felt it was important that I offer a female narrative on what it's like if you're in the care system. For the modern age, I mean, obviously, Homeboys is set in the 70s. Most of it is set in the 70s. And so after a bit of research that I completed here in the UK about what are the experiences like for young people, and I spoke to many of them, because I'm also invited to young offenders institutions, and these young people kept on telling me that they moved around a lot, so they never feel secure, they never feel any kind of identity, they never feel any kind of unconditional love, because they moved around from foster family to foster family. So I started off with that premise, and I was determined to have a female carry this story. I thought that was important because, again, they're in a care system too, not just boys.
You next find success writing in a new genre entirely, that of historical, or in a reflection of the global reading audience that you'd built and reached by then. The Trinidad and Tobago Saturday Express raved of Cane Warriors, that's set in 1760. His latest is a fictional account of a key but often overlooked event in Jamaican history. Tacky's Rebellion, a major revolt by enslaved Africans, planned via an island-wide conspiracy. In Wheatle's narrative, a 14-year-old named Moa is caught up in the growing revolt, driven by a fierce desire for freedom and self-determination. What first drew you to this history within Jamaica's own that you then introduced to a new generation of readers as powerfully as you did through Moa's journey, which Guyana's K-Tier News concluded was a work of edgy brilliance, tension-filled and heart-stopping, that brims with existential fervor?
Cane Warriors was very personal for me because, again, I was speaking with my mother, and she grew up in Richmond. And Richmond is very adjacent to where the plantations were, where Tacky slaved and others slaved, the Frontier and Trinity plantations. And my mother told me some fascinating history that she remembers when she was a young girl. This is in the late 30s, early 1940s, where her elders would sometimes speak about the legend of Tacky, Chief Tacky, who used to roam those lands, that landscape at night as a ghost, you know, so that inspired me. Also, my father inspired me also because on that day trip, when he took me to Firefly Estates that was owned by Noel Coward, next door to that was Fort Haldane, where Chief Tacky and his warriors basically sacked and pillaged and stole the rifles and guns and ammunition. And so all that intrigued me. And since reading The Black Jacobins by C.L.R. James, in the back of my mind, I've always wanted to tell a Jamaican slave revolt story.
How did it feel conquering this new territory on the page? And did it make you feel bolder about sailing off into another historical backdrop in Comosha, the Caribbean? And how exciting was it to be writing on the high seas with a book set upon Captain Morgan's infamous pirate ship?
It definitely stronger and bolder, you know, because I've achieved what I wanted to achieve with a book like Cane Warriors. Again, these kind of narratives you don't find too much in school libraries or any other kind of library, to be honest. It's just like me discovering the Black Jacobins. So if I'm adding to you know, the narratives that have yet to be told, then I feel like I'm doing my job properly. Kamosha is again a 14, 15-year-old girl who finds herself on a plantation, and she is sold into working in Port Royal, which is the main pirate hub of the time. I mean, Jamaica had this pirate hub where some of the richest pirates in the Caribbean used to congregate and plan their next raid on Spanish galleons. And once I did my research, and that a lot of the females who were employed there to work in bars, they were basically slaves. And so Kamosha is one of those young women, and she happens, you know, she's brought from this slave plantation and carried to Port Royal, but she's forced into being a prostitute, but she rejects that and she makes her escape. And so basically, Jake, I was kind of getting a bit weary of Pirates of the Caribbean, you know, those films with Johnny Depp. I was thinking, let me turn this narrative around, let me present something different. So that was my motivation. I took a ferry from, where was it, to Jersey, from Portsmouth to Jersey, which is an island near France. And there were very rocky seas at the time, and I always remember that. It made me ill, made me vomit over the side, I think. So I employed that own lived history to inform Kamosha feeling sick. And it's just a joyous story to write. It really was, you know. I mean, I'm going back to when I was a kid again, because I think I already mentioned Treasure Island, Robert Louis Stevenson, and that really excited me when I was a kid, when I was 8, 9 years old. So I wanted to create the same dynamic, the same excitement, and we don't see those books too much these days, you know, set in the past. high adventure, pirates, and so on. So I really wanted to see if I could write something like that.
You really seem to have found your stride in the 2020s, writing for children and young adult readers. And a story like the one told in The Humiliations of Welton Blake, where The Guardian promised fans they were in store for your characteristically lively language, impassioned Star Wars references, and colorful invented insults that make for a brief but riotously relatable slapstick romp. What for you is key to being funny on the page, and how do you translate that into the language of teenagers?
Yeah, Welton Blake. That again goes back to my school days, where I was a very shy kid, nervous around, like if I fancied a member of the female sex, I'll keep it to myself. I wouldn't tell her even though I was desperate to ask her out. And so, those awkward moments when you're 13, 14, 15, and, the hormones are starting to make a difference. And then you could get some great laughs from that. You really can. So that's what I did with Walton Blake, and he feels that he gets humiliated. But I guess many of us go through that experience. And again, as adults, sometimes we forget how how traumatic those experiences are. When we meet our first love and we don't know how to speak to that first love, and we don't know how to present ourselves, and especially in this day of everyone's got a mobile now, haven't they? And so when you lose your mobile, what do you do if you want to ask a girl out? It's very traumatic. So I learned quite a bit on those of my own experience. I was a shy kid, so if there's a lot of me in Walton Blake. Again, that was just a fun book to write. It really was. Um, I think um, I think I kind of revealed my love of Star Wars with that book. And again, it just me enjoying myself, having enjoying my writing. I think a writer should always have that. I mean, you cannot always write bleak stories where you think that, oh Lord, what a hard knock life. Sometimes you have to write something that's enjoyable for the reader. I mean, not to say that all my books are bleak and whatever. They've got some funny elements in it. Of course they have, especially in the dialogue and so on, and the way they interact and banter with each other. But every now and again, I'm going to come out with something that hopefully will make you laugh and grin and have a.
Crongton had become not just a familiar neighborhood to you, but to your readers, as well as you return to it periodically, with new sets of characters starring in their own stories, like Briggies and Kurd Cane Boys. What is your secret for keeping your dialogue so hip to what kids like Brig and his mates, Terror, Caldonia, and other teens of this generation actually sound like when they talk to each other?
For me, the dialogue comes from my early days of living in Brixton, where the banter was so different, the interaction was so different, it was so colourful as you get in those communities, those inner city communities, and I just loved it. And because I couldn't quite grasp it or understand it, I had to listen. I really had to pay attention. It was like again going to school and oh right, this is what that means and this is what this means. And so I had to become a student of the new vocabulary, if you like. And that stayed with me. And because of that, the dialogue in Brixton was so original, so creative, that I've always tried to keep that in my Crongton stories and whatever story I write. I always try to keep that originality. So I'm going to try to come up with a new word, a new phrase, a new way of saying things, because you probably know, Jake, that sometimes current snappy dialogues can date. So I try to reinvent it, at least a few phrases for every book.
Writing Witness must have been a very welcome challenge. This was what's known as a quick read, written for at-risk youth. What did you find most rewarding about reaching those readers, specifically serving time in youthful offender institutions?
Commissioned to write this story for, and my intention was, again, I've mentioned already that I've done a lot of work in young offenders institutions and prisons. I wanted to write something for them, something that they could engage with and they could relate to, and to make them think, if you like. Especially as in the UK, I know in the US there's a gun problem. In the UK, there's a knife problem. And so I didn't want to shy away from that. So I wanted to address that in Witness. And this this young man, he's got a choice, hasn't he? Because he's followed the peer leader in his classroom group, and he finds himself in a horrible predicament. And so, and that's been the experience of many young people of that age. You know, if you join a gang, or you might feel tempted to join a gang, you might end up in a predicament that my character does. And I've just learned actually that the book is going to be available for free for every young person in a young offenders institution throughout the country, which is great news to me. If it makes them think a little about what they've done, obviously not all of them are inside because they wounded somebody with a knife, but hopefully it makes them think about the kind of choices they make. So that was the intention of writing that book, and it's nonetheless an important book and something.
Inspiring young minds can be the best part of the job. In that spirit, what do you say to those young kids you're talking to who raise their hands and ask how to follow in your footsteps? What tangible tips do you give them on how to get started down that path?
If you're going to write a story, any kind of story, whether it's the children, whether it's the adults or whoever, um, you are your first audience. So try and satisfy you as a reader before you try to satisfy anybody else, because you're never going to satisfy everybody. That's impossible. Even J.K. Rowling has her critiques, even though she's sold 1 billion books. And so you have to enjoy what you're writing. You have to write what you know about, what you feel passionate about. So that would be my first tip. Write what moves you, what makes you passionate, what makes you angry, what makes you love, what all these things. And so that could be baseball, that could be American football, that could be an urban narrative, it could be anything. Just make sure you write what you feel passionate about. And that's the first step.
The Library Journal did a deep dive into the unique construction of your recently released memoir, sharing that with more than 40 short chapters, the book brings readers along as artists such as Bob Marley, Sister Nancy, Dennis Brown, and others educate a young black man about racial injustice and provide a lifeline when he felt at his lowest. Wheatle also finds family in his prison cellmate Simeon, who guides him toward a greater purpose, and he turns his life around using the music he loves and by tapping into his writing skills. The inspiration for Wheatle's fiction is apparent throughout his memoir, where he vividly and gracefully connects his own experiences to those of his characters, promising that readers will be drawn to his exquisite prose, and lovers of music will appreciate how reggae brings light during difficult times. Why did you feel it was finally time to write an autobiographical love letter in the remarkable Sufra, the memoir of a Brixton reggae head?
Sufferer is a reggae term. And for me, the definition of it is someone born into disadvantage, who, the fact that they were born, it means that they're very low on expectations, the pecking order and class and what have you. And so my story begins in that way. And I guess after the Steve McQueen drama, and it's only an hour odd, I felt there was a lot more to say. And so I really wanted to fill in the gaps. Who knows, I might even do a part two one day, but I just wanted to know, I just wanted to express the actual story of why I ended up in care, why these things happened to me. I wanted to detail the abuses. I think it's important for people to learn that and understand that. And also, I want people to learn that, hey, I'm not isolated in this. There's so many of us, whether it's in the US or the UK, who have to suffer these kind of life experiences. And I think it's very important that those narratives are on the page. I'm just always reminded of what Simeon used to tell me when he said, Alex, your story is as important as anybody else's. I don't care if they're a king or queen or prime minister or president. Your story is just as important as theirs is. And that stuck with me. And so that is, why I will write sufferer, why I write the stories that I do, because I want to give that representation to those sufferers on the page.
Can fans look forward to returning to Crongton anytime soon?
I've just finished the latest Crongton book that'll be available in the fall. It's current characters, the next Crongton book, The title is In the End, and really it's a sequel to Crongton Nights. So the same characters, and for me, it's like a treasure island in an urban environment. So that's how I describe it. So again, I enjoyed writing it. It was great fun to write it, and with characters that I love to death.
What can we look forward to further down the line?
I would like to write about cricket. I love cricket, uh, sports. So expect something sporty for me in the next year or so. That would be wonderful to add to what I've delivered already.
Now, you brought Crongton to the stage before, first when Brixton Rock was adapted in 2010 at the Young Vic Theatre, which then led you, as you got more comfortable with adaptation, to your braving out into the spotlight in a one-man play based on Uprising, which you then took on tour, performing on stages everywhere from Liverpool to the Oxford Playhouse, the Marlow Theatre, Canterbury, the Albany Theatre, and literature festivals, and an upcoming adaptation of Homegirl. What have you found to be the biggest contrast of writing for a book versus a play script?
I've been working on a musical reggae play with an entrepreneur over here called Levi Roots. We're having our premiere at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival in late August, so I'll be delighted, to see that open, and hopefully we will take the show down to London. The first thing I'm going to be honest with you that I enjoy about writing a play is that it's not as long as a novel. I can see the ending in sight. When I start, sometimes I start a novel, I think, oh Lord, I've got a long way to go here. But writing a play, I can summarize it in 2 or 3 pages, have the story, and just go to my desk, and I can see the finishing line. Otherwise, it's again plot driven. It's very close to YA writing, I believe. Like I believe writing for TV is like YA writing, where you have to be immediate. You have to just stick to the story, and you have to be quite visual, very visual. Obviously, you're writing characters on the stage, and so on. Obviously, the director has to say the movements and the interaction of the actors, but also the writer has some responsibility too. And so I do enjoy it. It's a different challenge for me. Um, One thing about writing in different genres that you learn as well. You learn to become a better writer, I believe, if you try different genres. And sometimes it's nice not writing in isolation. So it's nice having a producer you can send your work to, and you can ask what you think about this. And it's more of a collaboration, which I'm enjoying now because for so long I've been writing in isolation, which is nice. So I've got other intelligent heads to bounce ideas around. So yeah, I enjoy that, and I believe I will do more of that in the coming years.
Academy Award winning director Steve McQueen once observed that you write from a place of honesty and passion, with the full knowledge and understanding that change can only happen through words and actions. And as Time Magazine's feature reported, you two were first introduced when you started work in the writer's room for McQueen's new project, Small Acts, and had no idea that your own life experiences would end up as inspiration for small screen drama. How did you go from being a writer on that script to becoming the subject of a film that Rolling Stone magazine found compellingly opens with the kind of right hook, left hook devastation that McQueen's been cutting his teeth on for some years now in his movies? Rarely has that skill been as honed as it is here. Within 5 minutes, the film says more than most films say in 2 hours. For Wheatle to be the subject of a film in the first place is poignant. It's commanding, convincing proof and summary of so much of what McQueen intends to accomplish in the Small Axe series.
Yeah, that was a strange, surreal experience. My agent saw something in the TV media about Steve McQueen beginning prep work on this TV series about Black people experiences living in London. And so she proposed me as a writer to contribute to the series, to be part of the writing team. And so I had about 2 or 3 interviews with his production team, and I managed to pass that. And so one morning, I found myself sitting in a room with Steve McQueen and 5 other writers. I mean, I was slightly in awe. And so we were working on these episodes, just talking about what we wanted to express. in his episodes, this drama. And one day, Steve McQueen came in one morning and he said he'd really like a story that he wanted to tell about a young black man who has been institutionalized. In other words, maybe had experience in a children's home or prison and so on. And one of the other writers pointed towards me. He said, Alex, that is you. And so Steve wanted me to relate my story. I did so. And once he had heard me relate my story, he said, that's it. That is it. I want to do your story, Alex. And I was overwhelmed. You know, I didn't know quite what to say or do. And so that is how that came about. And I'm very proud of it.
Finally, we understand you had a very unique reaction, as anyone would, to seeing an actor playing yourself on the screen, did you not?
It was like, for a moment, Jake, it was like I died and I was like a ghostly kind of figure watching over the production. It was so, because he looked like me when I was that age, when I was 17, 18. It was quite weird and surreal. It really was. And I thought he'd done a tremendous job. And we got to know each other. His career is now thriving. So it's really good to know that my life story has springboarded a young actor's acting journey. You know, that's very exciting.
Alex, it's been a blast talking today. Thank you so much for taking out time to be on About the Authors TV.